Good evening, everyone. We're going to wait a couple minutes just to make sure that everybody that wants to join has joined before we start. All right, looks like we're good to go ahead and get started. So good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us tonight. We're looking forward to giving this presentation to you. Just so everyone knows, we do have translation services available in Spanish, Arabic, and Amharic. You're going to access those services by clicking on the globe icon on the bottom right of your screen and choosing the correct language. So our interpreters are going to give you that information now.
Buenas noches y bienvenidos. Para el español, oprima el globo en su computadora y escoja el español. En su celular, oprima el globo, escoja internet para el audio y luego los tres puntitos para seleccionar español. Gracias.
እንደምን አመሻችሁ እንኳን ደህና መጣችሁ ወደዚህ ስብሰባ። በዚህ ስብሰባ ላይ የትርጉም አገልግሎት እየተሰጠን ያለው እሱንም ለመጠቀም ለምትፈልጉ በአማርኛ በአረብኛና በስፓኒሽ እየተሰጠን ያለው የቋንቋ አገልግሎቱን ለማግኘት በኮምፒውተራችሁ በታችኛው በኩል ያለበትን የዓለም ቅርጽ ያለበትን በመጫን አምሃሪክ የሚለውን በመምረጥ አገልግሎቱን መጠቀም ትችላላችሁ። እንዲሁም በታብሌት እና በስልካችሁ ለምትጠቀሙ በስልካችሁ በታችኛው በኩል ያሉትን ሶስት ነጠብጣቦች በመጫን አምሃሪክ የሚለውን በመምረጥ አገልግሎቱን መጠቀም ትችላላችሁ። ታንክ ዩ።
مساء الخير، نشكركم على حضوركم معنا اليوم. بنحب ننوه بأنه هذه الجلسة مقدمة باللغات المختلفة الثلاثة بالترجمة الفورية الإسبانيولية والعربية والأمهرية. الرجاء إذا كنتم عم تحضرونا من الكمبيوتر، الرجاء الضغط على إشارة الكرة الأرضية بأسفل الشاشة لاختيار اللغة المناسبة لكم. وإذا كنتم عم تحضرونا من التليفون أو الآيباد، الرجاء الضغط على النقاط الثلاثة في أسفل الشاشة كرمال تختاروا الترجمة وبعدين عفوا اللغة المناسبة لكم، وهي اللغة العربية. رح تكون ترجمة مباشرة وفورية. شكرا مرة ثانية على الحضور.
And now I'm going to turn things over to Ms. Erica Gulick to start our presentation.
Thank you, Erin, and thank you to our interpreters. Good evening. My name is Erica Gulick. I am the Director of Capital Programs Planning and Design with Alexandria City Public Schools. With me tonight, we also have Sophie Humer, who's a planner too with Alexandria City Public Schools, will be presenting to you tonight. And there are some city staff as well who have joined us to answer any questions that may come up. At the bottom of your screen, you should see a Q&A chat feature. Please feel free to use that throughout the presentation to ask questions or submit comments to us. We will have some time at the end of the presentation to answer your questions. Okay, so we'll get started. Tonight, we're here to talk about the George Mason Modernization Project, in particular, picking up from where we left off in June with finalizing the feasibility study, and as well as giving some updates related to swing space. If you could go to the next slide, Erin. So tonight we want to talk about what were the major outcomes of the feasibility study, where are we in the modernization project process for George Mason, what swing space opportunity is ACPS pursuing, and how will the George Mason community be engaged, and what are the next steps for the George Mason modernization project. I'll now turn it over to my colleague Sophie, who will talk through the feasibility study.
Thanks, Erica. So these are the major outcomes of the feasibility study that we finalized earlier this year and presented to the community in June. The first was regarding the priority of the projects, showing that given all factors, the school modernization projects are in the correct order, meaning that George Mason would come first and then Cora Kelly. The next was that both schools should be complete replacements. Both George Mason and Cora Kelly, those school buildings have reached the end of their life cycle. And another key element of the study was to look at the implications for swing space in potential scenarios, and showed that swing space may be or is preferable to maintain George Mason Park and limit rezoning of the open space at Cora Kelly. Next slide, please. So these were the key themes of community feedback that we received during those community meetings and other feedback we've received during this time. First was that community members expressed concerns about losing the park and open space before, during, and after construction. The second was that neighbors of the school have concerns about stormwater and flooding, as well as traffic impacts during construction. And school community members had questions regarding the ultimate capacity and the need for preschool. Next slide. So a little bit of a history of this feasibility study. It began in the summer of 2019 when we finalized the contract with the architect Studio 27 to help us work through these feasibility studies. An initial draft was completed in the fall of 2019, and preliminary findings were presented to the school board in January of 2020. Then during early 2020, more community meetings were held, and we had initial feedback received. Then in March 2020, the study was put on hold due to the ongoing COVID-19 pandemic. And in January of 2021, we were able to pick the study back up and present to the community later that summer in June. We were able to have community meetings as well as present to PTAs and to the school board. And so where we are now is having these community meetings on potential swing space. So I will, next slide, please. A major outcome of the school board discussion in June was that the school board is favorable to swing space off-site because it would allow for the flexibility in the design of the school, preserve any existing open space, as well as maximize student safety and minimize those disruptions on school sites. So I will turn it over to Erica.
Thanks, Sophie. And so that was just kind of a brief overview of our feasibility study and some previous conversations we've had. Hopefully you were able to participate in our previous feasibility study meetings. And now where we are in the process, as we've stated, is preparing for that next capital budget, which will be presented to the school board in November, which will include either a decision to have to pursue swing space. And currently what we're doing, we're still in contract negotiations, so there's not much we can say, but we are exploring purchasing 1703 North Beauregard, which could serve as swing space for both George Mason and Cora Kelly. And then after the construction of those new elementary schools, this would become a new school itself. So we also have a new school in our capital program for a 600 student school that could be in this building. You could see in the plan, it's right next to our Ferdinand T. Day Elementary School. It also shares a large parking garage with Ferdinand T. Day Elementary School. So we felt it was a good place. We have some history in this block. We understand the public process and the city improvement, permitting process to make improvements to the facility and the area to convert it to a school. And so we did really think this was a great opportunity, and as did the school board. So this is what we're pursuing now. If we could go to the next slide. So just to talk a little bit about timeline, because we did start the feasibility study earlier than we might have normally started a feasibility study. And that was really to determine if we needed swing space, because that would be something additional we would have to put in our budget. So for George Mason and for this potential new building, you can see the two timelines here. Currently, if the school board moves through successfully with a purchase, we would begin design of that facility, ideally in this year or in the winter or spring, potentially next summer. We would begin that design process. We'd then move to construction and renovation. You can see that the design and construction phases for this are a little bit shorter. That is because it is an already built building, and so we are just talking about interior renovations to bring it up to bring it into for use for a school. And it would then be used as swing space through the next several years for George Mason and Cora Kelly, making sure we have it ready plenty in time for construction to start at George Mason. And then it would go through another conversion after it's done being used as swing space. It would go through another conversion to create it to a permanent school for Alexandria City Public Schools. For George Mason, you can see we still have this planning time, getting ready for that design process. Luckily, because we've completed the feasibility study already, we're kind of in a good place where we're set up really to jump into that design when we're ready. So design for the George Mason is currently proposed in the school board's capital improvement program budget as part of fiscal year 2024, which starts in summer of 2023. And so that's when we would anticipate design starting for that building. So approximately 2 years from now is when design might start. We would probably be in design for 2 years. That's a very engaging process, and we'll talk a little bit more about what the engagement process looks like for that. And then we would build the building, build whatever the new school is going to be. That would probably take us another 2 years. And then we would open potentially in the fall of 2027. Of course, all of these timelines are subject to change. If we can make them go faster, we would do that. Or, if there's an issue with funding or something else holds us up, the schedule could get elongated. So I just want to have that caveat, but this is our plan for now. And we can go to the next slide. We wanted to provide some examples. We know the George Mason community, not all of you may have seen our Ferdinand T. Day Elementary School, but it is great. I'm not sure because of COVID right now if we are doing any kinds of tours, but if you do want more information on the school, you can always reach out to us. But this is an example where we did convert an office building into a school facility. You can see on the left side is the entrance to Ferdinand T. Day. We actually added an elevator and stairwell to the building to be able to for egress for a school for different requirements, and also to be able to separate the top 2 floors from the bottom 4 where the school are. And it's a great school. When you enter, you'll enter into, if you see that picture, that's kind of the one that the cursor is currently on, that's the lobby. So you enter, there's a very nice timeline of Ferdinand T. Day and his contributions to Alexandria City. There's also a great lobby area space. Just to the left of that image is the library or media center. Again, really cool furniture. One of the things that's great about this building is it has a lot of windows and they're elevated. So sometimes some of the teachers or students even feel like they're in a tree house. And that would be a similar case to the 1703 North Beauregard building. Above that picture, you see a play space that we created on top of the parking garage. So it's not ideal, but it does work. And our students do love the facility to be able to play there. There's also additional space on the bottom level, outdoor space. It's also adjacent or across the street from a nature preserve. There's another picture of a media center, and then you could just see some of our extended learning or collaboration space on the right, which that really takes place in the hallways. where classrooms could go out and experience the space a little bit differently. So we just wanted to give you all some examples of what a renovated office building as a school could look like. It looks like a school when you're inside of it, even though on the outside it might still look like an office building. We can go to the next slide. And so this is the facility in question that we're talking about. It is right adjacent to 1701 or for Ferdinand T. Day Elementary School. It is right off of North Beauregard near Seminary Road. That is the location. So we do know it's on the opposite side of the city. We of course know we'll have to work out transportation, logistics, scheduling and start time, and all of those things will be a discussion that we'll have over the next 2 years prior to opening this facility for swing space. Next slide. On the community engagement process, we wanted to make you aware of what you can expect for these two projects. So first, on the 1703 building, we will be having regular community meetings, of course, because we're still in negotiations and there's only so much we could do and spend money on and say. Likely these will start a little bit more heavily in the spring, but we will certainly keep you updated, and George Mason community will continue to be involved in that process. Regular updates to our community members are sent out via our CIP newsletter. It's a monthly newsletter where we provide updates on all of our major projects, and that will include this one. And coordination, it's really important that at the school, it'll first be serving George Mason, but it'll be serving also Core Kelly and have a longer term purpose. It's also directly adjacent to Ferdinand T. Day. So it'll really be a combined effort of those three school communities, as well as whatever the future plan is for that final permanent school. And that we'll have to make sure we're staying in all of you throughout that design and renovation process, and then through its use as well. For the George Mason modernization process, again, which will start likely 2 years from now, we'll set up, we'll be procuring a design firm. We will set up an advisory group with certain stakeholders from your community. Those will include members of the PTA, neighbors, school leadership, civic associations. We typically have a planning commission member on board, as well as potentially a council or school board representative, just to make sure what we're designing, and that's really for during the design process, to make sure that what we're designing is responsive to our needs, but also to being good neighbors and responding to our community needs as well. Again, with the George Mason project, we'll have regular community meetings on the project in addition to those advisory group meetings. We'll also have regular updates via that CIP newsletter. We've been doing recently feedback through polls and feedback forms, and we'll be using other engagement tools to make sure we're involving as many people in the design process as we can, especially our staff, our students, our families, and all of our neighbors and community members who might use the site when it's not being used as a school. Go to the next slide. Okay, and that is all of our presentation today. We just wanted to be able to provide an update and give you some information. You can reach out to, here you have Sophie's email, you have my email, as well as my supervisor's email. Dr. Alicia Hart is Executive Director of Facilities and Operations. Our web pages are listed there as well. Also, Erin Metcalf, who is running, her email's not on here, but if you do have her email, she is our CIP communications specialist, and she tends to be faster than me at responding to people. So she's also a great person to reach out to with questions that you may have. But at this time, we want to open it up for questions for you all that have joined. Thank you again for joining us tonight. There was actually a pretty good turnout, it looks like, which is good. That's what we want. We hope you continue to stay engaged. I will actually ask Sophie to go through the questions, and we can start to answer them. Feel free to continue to submit questions too. We have plenty of time, so If you have questions, feel free to put them in the Q&A chat and hopefully we'll get to them tonight.
Okay, we'll just start with the first question here. What does it mean that the schools have reached the end of their life cycle?
That's a good question. So sometimes we use lingo that doesn't make sense to the outside world, so apologies for that. But that means that the George Mason facility, I believe, was built in the 1930s.
1939.
Yes, so it is almost 90 years old, 85-ish years old, if my mental math is correct. And so that facility, when we say it's reached the end of its useful life, the systems and the building itself are beyond, in some cases beyond repair, or there's just so many repairs needed that it makes sense to replace the building. And so that's what we mean when we say beyond its useful life, just that we don't believe that the facility will make it that much longer. It makes more sense for us to replace the building than to try to continue to repair it. Thank you for that question.
Okay, next question. Are we definitely doing swing space? I thought there are still other options on the table. Why can't they go to school at George Mason during construction? I think we wouldn't mind losing green space temporarily if it meant the kids can stay there.
Yeah, thanks for bringing this up. And we did talk about the different options during the feasibility study process about having swing space, not having swing space. What are the trade-offs? I think ultimately the conversation among our leadership and school board right now is that swing space does make the most sense for us, to not completely eliminate the open space, as well as to be able to be more flexible with the design. So that is the option that we're pursuing at this time. Again, that will have to go through a CAP budget process and several more reviews, but that is the way we are moving forward currently. Some of you are submitting comments, and that's great. We probably won't read them, but we'll read them ourselves, but we won't read them aloud. We'll just use this time to answer the questions.
All right, next question. How are you improving traffic access at the 1701 building? Seems like a lot of traffic for two schools and concentrated times for drop off and pickup.
Yeah, this is a great question too. And we are having some real life experience with it now at Douglas MacArthur and Patrick Henry. So we do know over there, the school year did start off a little rocky related to traffic, but it does seem to have worked out. Likely what'll happen in this case, because we don't have it all designed or the operations designed, but likely what'll happen is we'll have to share a bus loop with Ferdinand T. Day, and we'll have to share the pickup and drop off loop with Ferdinand T. Day. And that will mean that the schools will have to start at different times. In the case of Patrick Henry and Douglas MacArthur, Patrick Henry starts at 8 a.m. Douglas MacArthur starts at 8:30. As we go through the design process and the review process with the city, we'll have to do traffic study, and we'll have to lay out that process, and we'll ultimately determine as far as start times and its circulation and traffic, what makes the most sense from a safety perspective. But that is a great point, and one that I'm sure we will talk a lot more about.
What are our ideas for use of the swing space afterwards?
It's a good question too, and I certainly don't want to speak for the superintendent or the school board. It will be a 600 student permanent school building. There have been discussions about it being for middle school capacity, because we have been focused on elementary capacity with the Douglas MacArthur, well, Patrick Henry, Ferdinand Day, Douglas MacArthur, and now the eventually George Mason and Cord Kelly projects. And at the high school level, we have the high school project, which will be the mini Howard redevelopment. But we are still lacking in middle school capacity solutions. And so it hasn't been officially decided, but there are discussions about potentially making it a smaller middle school setting for 600 students. But I think options are on the table, and that'll be something that the school board and our teaching, learning, and leadership team, as well as superintendent, will explore and decide what is best for that site.
All right, next question. What is the cost of purchasing the swing space building to the city?
Another good question, and one we can't talk about at this time just because we're still in contract negotiations, but when we can, I'm sure we'll be happy to share that information.
All right, a question about future George Mason. I noticed the forest design at MacArthur involved cutting down all the trees. Can we make an effort at George Mason to keep the trees in the front? Mature trees are irreplaceable.
Thank you for the question. And I just would note that we did make an effort to preserve some of the trees at MacArthur. We are preserving some of the oldest and largest trees on the MacArthur site. But yes, absolutely. I think this is something that came up during George Mason feasibility study conversations, is the desire to keep some of those trees, the open space, but even more specifically, some of the more mature trees. And I think when we start the design effort, that'll certainly be something we bring to our design team and ask them to consider as they are designing the facility.
All right, question about swing space. How will you provide for outside activity with the new school, used as a swing school and then a permanent facility? Right now, you're using the roof of the parking lot. You mentioned a new school for 600 students. Where will they be able to have outdoor activities?
So another thing I think we'll need to talk about during the design process, it is tight. It is a more urban model. So for the schools, if we do, one thing that would be beneficial is that if we do own both of them, then we have a little bit more control about what happens in the open space between them. So there's possibility we could redesign that and take advantage of some of the facilities that are around the site, maybe not necessarily on the site, but around the site. That will be a challenge, and we'll have to look for creative solutions like we did with putting the play space on the parking garage. I think if it's not permanently an elementary use, maybe there's less of a need for play space, and it's more getting the students to outdoor athletic facilities or something like that, which currently now we do for athletics. We do bus students to different schools. I think those will all be considerations when we move into design of the project, and then ultimately when we determine the permanent use and what the permanent outdoor play areas or athletic facilities or whatever it may be are needed to support the school.
Okay. Next up is a process question. You may have said but missed, is swing space being voted on in November? Do you foresee any objections or challenges in approval?
So the swing space and what we've talked about as part of this feasibility study process is that ultimately the school board's decisions are reflected in their capital improvement program budget. And so this, the CIP budget will include, if we are pursuing the swing space and purchasing this facility, then the CIP budget will include funding for renovating that building. If the school board doesn't propose the funding or city council doesn't approve it, that's where that vote happens. There won't be a formal vote on swing space, but the formulation of the CIP budget will take into account what their proposed solution is.
What do you mean when you say the green open space will not be completely lost? And I think that's in reference to new George Mason School.
Okay. So whenever we design a new facility, the city has a goal. I'll call it a goal. Maybe it's in between a requirement and a goal, maybe, that we preserve the same amount of open space that we have on site. That would be the goal, whether we were building on site without swing space or without. We would look at how much open space there is now at George Mason, and not necessarily zoned open space, but just how much outdoor play area is there now, whether that be grass fields, baseball courts, anything like that, and trying to make sure that we are able to replace or accommodate that amount of square footage of open space on the final design. By having swing space, it may help us keep more of the existing open space. Whereas if we didn't, then we would have to replace that open space elsewhere. And that's where we get into just changing kind of the landscape and the certainly the trees and things like that on the site. So that's, hopefully that helps answer that question regarding open space.
All right, next question. If I'm not mistaken, Mini Howard was being considered as a swing space. If it was, but isn't now, are there any ideas as to what it might be used for in the future?
So there were some discussions in the community about using Mini Howard as swing space. I will say that the school board has not had a formal discussion or decision on that, using Mini Howard as swing space. One of the challenges with Mini Howard is it's old itself. It needs a lot of work. We're actually having facility conditions assessments done now, which will include conditions assessments on Mini Howard and George Mason, as well as all of our facilities, to see exactly how much work it would require. But then we also have to keep in mind that where the fields are currently is where we're building the new school. And the fields and the parking and all those other supports that are on the east side of the site that will be taken offline during construction of the building and opening of the building are critical to the operation of the high school. And so if we take that facility, if we leave that building there, then we won't be able to put in the athletic fields. We won't be able to put in adequate parking or our bus loop that's currently proposed on that side, all of those things that are needed to really complete the full design of the high school campus. So we were fortunate that we were able to find a workable solution at Patrick Henry for Douglas MacArthur. I'm not sure that that's the case at Mini Howard, but again, it may be something that comes up as part of CIP discussions.
All right, so I'm also seeing some questions about the advisory committees, just as neighbors and as citizens group. How can you request to be on the advisory group when it is formed?
I'm sorry, Sophie, how my audio cut out for that.
Yeah, so I am seeing a few questions about requesting to be on the advisory group. So how can you request to be on the advisory group when it is formed?
So typically what will happen with the advisory group is we will create a list of certain representation that we want from different communities. For example, the civic associations. I saw a question related to that. We would reach out to the neighboring or the impacted civic associations and ask for a representative from those civic associations. We would also reach out to PTAC and ask for a representative from there. We may include some community at large, and then we would ask for those people to be a part of that. Really, we look to make sure we have the right representation on the group. But when we start that design process and when we have a community kind of kickoff meeting for the design, If there's interest in being a part of the advisory group and there is a slot with the appropriate representation, then you can certainly reach out to us to request to fill that position, or to your civic association or your PTA group or whoever your organization is that you would be representing.
Okay.
A lot of good questions.
Yeah, a lot of great questions. Trying to pick up where I left off. Let's see. Okay, I am wondering how logistics will work for the swing space. Given 1703 is nowhere near the neighborhood, will children take buses and be required to take a long ride there and back? Will parents drive them? Will companion kids have to be picked up during rush hour across town?
All good questions, all things we'll continue to talk about, but certainly transportation would be provided for the George Mason students while they are in the swing space. They certainly are not within a walk zone of that swing space, so transportation would be provided for all students. As far as after school and potentially before school programs, again, the timing for those would have to be worked out, as well as transportation. We do know it is a little bit of a distance further, as far as, dealing with rush hour traffic, picking up students from aftercare. That's something we'll have to continue to talk about, and may just know that that's an issue we may have at the site.
All right, a few questions about the current George Mason. Will there be consideration of keeping the historic facade at George Mason Elementary School?
Do you want to answer that one, Sophie?
Yeah, so as part of the feasibility studies, all three scenarios preserve that historic frontage of George Mason. Its programming, whether it would be the admin or a classroom space, or possibly a park space, but those three scenarios did keep the historic frontage of the building for each of those scenarios for George Mason. All right. If the North Beauregard location is not purchased and used as swing space, what is Plan B?
That's a good question. This kind of is the plan. I think right now, we did hear the question about Minnie Howard. Potentially, that's something we could explore further, though we're not sure. We're not sure how successful that will be. So right now, this is the option. We know we don't have a lot of purchase options in the city of Alexandria, as far as built facilities or even just land to build facilities on. So we were fortunate enough to be able to identify this opportunity, and we are working to hopefully make sure that it works out. If it doesn't move forward, like I said, an alternative swing space we could potentially look for. Again, not sure how successful that would be, or we may have to go back to the decision to not have swing space, and what would that impact be? Though it's challenging for George Mason, it's actually especially challenging for Court Kelly, just given some of the site constraints over there and some of the concerns we have. I saw one question that I want to ask of Erin. There was a question about how do you sign up for the CIP newsletter. Erin, do you want to let people know how to do that?
Absolutely. So the CIP newsletter, you can sign up through our website. We do have that linked on all of our CPPD pages. I'll also put the link in the chat before we finish this webinar, just to make sure everybody has access to it. You can also do it on the main website as well. They have the links available to you there. And as soon as you sign up for it, you are guaranteed to get it every month on the first Monday of the month. If for some reason the technology is not working out and you don't receive it after signing up, you're more than welcome to email me directly. I'll put my email in the chat as well, and let me know that there's an issue, and I will add you manually. And so that is how you would sign up for the CIP newsletter.
Thanks, Erin. And if you haven't signed up or you haven't gotten them yet, it is fairly new. I think we just started this in like March, April, I want to say. So it is fairly new, something we're doing just to make sure our community is kept up to date with our major capital projects, especially because we know we tend to be able to reach out to our families and students and our staff. But there's a much broader Alexandria community we are, of course, trying to keep engaged on, especially on these projects. So please sign up for it. Tell your friends. We give good updates on there, also on High School Project, Douglas MacArthur, and other projects we have going on throughout the city. So, thanks, Erin. Sophie, were there any others? I saw a lot of similar questions come in. Okay. Well, I think we did see a lot of questions come in, so it is very possible that we did not get to your question, but we will after this meeting. Erin collects all of the questions for us, and we're able to go through them. Again, Erin just put her email and I believe the link to sign up for the CIP newsletter in the chat. If you ask a question, we didn't answer it, feel free to follow up with her. We'll also be updating the frequently asked questions web pages with questions you have tonight, as well as other questions that we've received throughout the project and questions we know that will come up, especially related to the swing space and operational issues. So please be on the lookout for that as well. Maybe a good resource for us in the future. And you can expect to hear from us hopefully soon. Likely we will not have, we'll start the CIP budgeting process that's in early November. The superintendent presents his proposed budget on November 11th to the school board. They have a series of work sessions, and then they adopt the budget on December 16th, which is basically their proposal that goes to council. Similarly, on the purchase, we're hopefully moving through that process and should have an update in late winter, early spring, and we'll be able to share more information and hopefully get the design process started and a lot more exciting stuff. So thank you to my colleagues Sophie and Erin for running the meeting tonight, and thank you all for joining, and I hope everyone has a good night.